Imagine embarking on a classic American road trip with your absolute best friend.
Oh, yeah.
You've got the windows down, the world is ahead of you, and you are heading out west to start a completely new chapter of your life.
Right. It's like a modern rite of passage.
Exactly. It's a rite of passage. But then I want you to imagine that exact same trip ending just 4 days later with a handwritten journal entry that reads, "I killed and buried my best friend today."
God, it is an incredibly chilling image. It
Yeah.
just completely shatters that romanticized idea of, the open road and wilderness exploration that so many of us grew up with.
It really does. So today we are taking a deep dive into a profound tragedy that unfolded in the summer of 1999.
Right, down in the Chihuahuan Desert of New Mexico.
Yes, exactly. And we have a massive stack of sources in front of us for this one.
Not idea.
We were talking forensic reports, uh, search and rescue logs, legal rulings, and those haunting journal entries left behind by the two best friends, David Coughlin and Rafi Kodikian.
Yeah, the journals are they're tough to read.
They really are.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the terrifying intersection of environmental duress, cognitive collapse, and the incredibly blurry legal boundaries of what some might argue is a mercy killing.
Because it's a case that forces you to examine the absolute limits of human endurance,
Right.
both physical and psychological, and, what happens when those limits are violently breached.
So welcome to the conversation. We promise you a story today that is going to make you rethink everything you know about wilderness survival
Absolutely.
and the sheer fragility of the human mind, plus how our justice system attempts to handle the truly unthinkable.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how a cross-country drive to California ended in a tragic death, we first have to look at the cascade of seemingly small, almost innocent errors that initiated the crisis.
Right, because disasters like this, they rarely happen all at once.
No.
They're usually the result of a chain reaction, just minor miscalculations that compound over time.
So let's start with August 1999. David Coughlin is 26. He's actually an environmental science student heading to UC Santa Barbara for his master's.
Which is ironic, given what happens.
Very. And his best friend, Rafi Kodikian, is 25. He's an aspiring writer who had been working at the Boston Globe.
And these guys have been incredibly close friends since college.
Right. So they arrive at Carlsbad Caverns National Park in New Mexico, and they decide to do a quick one-night hike in Rattlesnake Canyon.
Just a brief wilderness experience before finishing their drive. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But their supply list for this overnight hike is, well, it's genuinely shocking.
Oh, it's appalling.
Between the two of them, they bring a total of 3 pints of water and 1 single pint of Gatorade.
And we really have to emphasize that an active adult in a hot desert environment requires a minimum of 1 gallon of water per day.
A gallon.
Yes, just to maintain basic hydration. And they walked into a canyon where temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, with, less than 10% of what they physiologically needed.
Yeah.
Heading into a 100-degree desert with 3 pints of water is like trying to run a marathon on a single shot of espresso.
That is a great way to put it. And their immediate blunder upon arriving at camp just accelerates the clock.
Oh, hot dogs.
Yes. They decide to make dinner, which consists of boiling hot dogs. So they take 1 full pint of their precious limited water, boil their hot dogs in it, and consume it.
It's hard to hear. They are treating a hostile, unforgiving desert environment like a managed state park campground. Like there's a water spigot down the road.
Right.
It is a fundamental misunderstanding of resource management. When you are in the desert, water isn't a beverage.
Yeah.
It is a biological tether to life. Using it to cook processed meat shows a complete disconnect from the reality of their environment.
Absolutely. So the next morning, August 5th, they decide to head back to the trailhead. Now, Rattlesnake Canyon isn't a paved loop.
No, it's rugged.
Yeah, you have to follow these little stacks of rocks called cairns. But they miss a critical stone cairn marker and wander off the main trail into these remote side canyons.
And the clock is ticking fast now.
Right, because by the afternoon, all of their fluids are entirely gone. I mean, think about the last time you blindly trusted your GPS, spaced out for a second, and missed a highway exit.
Right. It's just annoying.
Exactly, it's annoying.
Yeah.
Now, imagine making that same minor cognitive slip, but it initiates a fatal countdown. I mean, why didn't they just turn around the second they got confused?
Well, that is the perfect way to contextualize it. The physical environment they were in fundamentally alters how the brain operates.
How so?
The bottoms of those desert canyons act as literal heat traps. The ambient temperature is over 100 degrees, but the limestone rocks radiate heat back at you like an oven.
Ugh, like walking into a sauna.
Worse! This immediately accelerates sweat rates as the body desperately tries to cool its core.
But with no water to replenish that lost fluid, the blood literally starts to thicken, right?
Yes.
Your heart has to pump harder to push this sludgy blood around your body.
Precisely. Your body enters a state of acute heat exhaustion very rapidly. And when the brain is deprived of water and oxygen-rich blood, the prefrontal cortex,
Which is the logic and reasoning center.
exactly, it literally begins to shrink and slow down. The brain has to triage its limited resources, so it redirects power to the amygdala, the primitive survival center.
Wow.
You stop processing geographical logic and start processing pure, unadulterated threat.
Which totally explains what happens next. Because their panic directly triggers a breakdown in their spatial awareness.
Yeah, it completely falls apart.
And this leads to what I think is one of the most chilling forensic discoveries in this entire case.
The proximity paradox.
Yes. When you hear about hikers dying in the wilderness, you assume they were miles and miles from civilization.
Usually.
But forensic analysis later revealed that their final camp was less than 100 feet from the official trail.
Let that sink in. They were surrounded by safety.
It's unbelievable. Their parked car was only about a mile to a mile and a half away. Under normal conditions, that is a 30 to 40-minute walk.
Right.
They were 1.2 miles from an active scenic drive that park staff patrolled, and just 2 miles from the fully equipped visitor center.
What's fascinating here is a phenomenon neuropsychologists refer to as cognitive map failure.
Okay, what is that?
When an individual is subjected to extreme environmental stress, their mental representation of their surroundings completely divorces from physical reality.
Oh, wow.
The geography of Rattlesnake Canyon is rugged with uniform vertical limestone walls. To a healthy brain, it's a landscape you navigate.
Right.
But to a panicked, dehydrated brain operating purely on amygdala response, those vertical walls create a profound illusion of deep isolation.
But wait, if they were a stone's throw from the trail, how could they not just look up and see it? Even if you're panicking, logic dictates that if you were trapped in a canyon, you just climb up to get a vantage point, right?
Oh, you would think so?
The canyon walls aren't perfectly smooth glass. Why wouldn't they just scramble up a few dozen feet to look around? They would have literally seen the scenic drive.
Because cognitive map failure destroys symbolic and spatial reasoning. It's like, imagine a video game rendering engine when a computer is overheating.
Okay.
The brain stops rendering the distant background. The trails, the highways, the larger geographical context, it just vanishes.
Wow.
The brain only has the processing power to render the immediate 10-foot radius a threat. They didn't climb up to look for the trail because their brains had lost the capacity to understand that a world existed beyond the rocks directly in front of their faces.
It is truly terrifying. It's like their own minds built a prison out of a dozen feet of rock.
It really is.
We also know from the sources that they possessed a topographical map of the area. But neuropsychological testimony during the trial revealed that because of the dehydration, looking at that map was like looking at a foreign script.
Yeah, the contour lines meant absolutely nothing to them.
They actually eventually burned the map trying to make a signal fire.
Which perfectly highlights the loss of symbolic thinking. A map requires your brain to translate a two-dimensional drawing into a three-dimensional landscape.
Right.
When your prefrontal cortex is compromised by severe dehydration, that higher-order translation is physically impossible.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because they falsely believed they were hopelessly stranded miles from civilization, their desperate attempts to survive actually manufactured the symptoms that convinced them death was imminent.
Yeah, the misattribution.
So it's August 6th and 7th. They're desperate for hydration. They resort to licking rocks in the early morning.
Hoping for dew.
Exactly. They try to strain their own urine through a baseball cap, which they obviously find impossible to drink. And then they forage.
Right.
They find prickly pear cactus fruit and eat it. But it's unripe.
Oh, no.
Shortly after, Coughlin begins vomiting continuously. Kudikian watches his best friend become violently ill and interprets this as terminal dehydration. He thinks it's systemic organ failure.
Right. He truly believes he is watching his friend's body shut down from a lack of water.
But the autopsy later proved that Coughlin's dehydration, while serious, was not yet fatal. He was not experiencing terminal organ failure.
He had time.
The continuous vomiting was purely a localized gastrointestinal reaction to the acidic, unripe cactus fruit they had just eaten.
Yeah.
If they had just stayed in the shade, Medical experts testified Coughlin could have survived another 24 to 48 hours.
Easily.
So their attempt to survive by eating the cactus is exactly what created the symptom that convinced them survival was impossible. It's a literal self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is a textbook, albeit deeply tragic, example of cognitive misattribution.
Cognitive misattribution.
Yes. When we experience something we don't understand, our brains automatically try to map it onto something we do understand. Or, in survival situations, something we deeply fear.
So because they lack basic wilderness knowledge, they didn't know what unripe prickly pear does to a human stomach.
Exactly. They mapped a very simple biological reaction, essentially severe food poisoning, onto their greatest looming fear, which was terminal dehydration.
Wow.
They took a temporary, non-lethal symptom and attributed it to an unavoidable, agonizing death.
And believing that Coughlin was experiencing the agonizing final stages of organ failure, the friends turned to a final, permanent solution.
This part is just, it's so bleak.
They documented this entire nightmare in real time. In the journal they had brought to record their road trip, you can see the transition on the page from this lighthearted travelogue to a very dark record of despair.
The journal becomes a real-time record of a completely collapsed reality.
Coughlin writes about his mouth being too dry to even swallow. They actually begin discussing dying together to escape the pain.
Right.
They first attempt a mutual suicide pact.
Mm-hmm.
They plan to slash their wrists, but they abandon the plan because the pocket knife they're using is too dull. It won't cut deep enough. Then on the morning of August 8th, the situation reaches its climax. According to the journal and Coughlin later testimony, Coughlin is in pure agony from the vomiting and begs Coughlin to end his pain.
He literally asks him to kill him.
Right. So Coughlin takes a sharper folding knife and stabs his best friend twice in the chest. That leads to the journal entry. Quote, "I killed and buried my best friend today. Dave had been in pain all night. At around 5 or 6, he turned to me and begged that I put my knife through his chest. God and his family and mine, please forgive me." End quote.
And the incredible cruelty of the timeline is that Ranger Lance Matson discovers the camp just hours after that entry is written.
It's just hours.
It's just hours.
But when investigators get to the scene, the physical evidence doesn't quite add up with the story of two men on the absolute brink of death.
No, it doesn't.
If Coughlin was so physically incapacitated that he believed they couldn't even walk a mile to the car, how did he manage to bury his friend?
That was the glaring forensic discrepancy that changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. When law enforcement arrived, they found that Coughlin had gathered and stacked heavy limestone boulders to build a grave over Coughlin's body.
Heavy boulders.
Yes. Some of those rocks weighed over 70 pounds.
Okay, hold on. Let me push back on that a bit. The prosecution clearly used that to say, look, he had the strength to walk out. But couldn't that just be adrenaline?
How do you mean?
We always hear those stories of mothers lifting cars off their babies in a panic. If your best friend is dead and you are terrified, doesn't your body just dump adrenaline and give you hysterical strength for a few minutes?
It's a really fair question, but physiology doesn't support it in this specific context.
Really?
Yeah. Hysterical strength driven by adrenaline relies on a vascular system that can rapidly deliver oxygen and glucose to your muscles.
Oh, I see.
In a state of severe dehydration, your blood volume is drastically reduced and viscous. Your heart simply cannot pump that sludgy blood fast enough to facilitate an adrenaline surge of that magnitude.
That makes a lot of sense.
Moving 70-pound boulders repeatedly to construct a grave requires sustained muscular coordination and cardiovascular capacity. The forensic experts looked at that and concluded, if you have the biological resources to deadlift 70 pounds of limestone multiple times, you are not suffering from terminal incapacitation.
You're just not.
You have the physical energy to walk a mile.
Wow. Okay, so the biology actively refutes the defense's narrative. And furthermore, the autopsy showed the first stab wound missed the heart and punctured a lung.
Yeah.
Meaning it wasn't the instantaneous, painless death they had envisioned. It required a second fatal strike.
Which is horrific to imagine.
So this massive contradiction between the physical evidence of his strength and Coughlin's narrative of being utterly helpless, that shifted the tragedy directly into the legal system.
It did.
The state initially charges Coughlin with first-degree murder, which carries a mandatory life sentence.
Right, because from the state's perspective, the forensic evidence proves a homicide occurred by a man who had the physical capacity to seek help but chose not to.
But the defense tries something else.
Yeah, the defense's initial strategy to counter this is legally fascinating. They try to claim involuntary intoxication.
Right. They argue that the severe dehydration altered Kadikian's brain chemistry so drastically
Mm.
that he was essentially intoxicated,
Right.
like completely out of his mind, and therefore not legally responsible for his actions.
But Judge Jay Forbes firmly rejects that defense.
Why?
Because in the eyes of the law, intoxication implies the introduction of an external substance that impairs judgment.
Uh,
Dehydration is a natural physical state. It's a lack of a substance. Allowing a natural physiological state to serve as a legal excuse for homicide would set a highly dangerous and chaotic precedent.
the prosecution's stance during the trial was incredibly clear, and I think this quote sums it up perfectly. Quote, "Where there is life, there is hope."
Especially considering that rescue arrived just hours later.
Exactly. The state is arguing that you cannot legally appoint yourself the judge of whether someone is beyond saving, no matter how dire the wilderness conditions seem.
Which highlights the immense friction in this case. The law relies on objective black and white standards. A person was killed, therefore a crime was committed.
Right.
But survival situations are inherently subjective. They're messy, and they're governed by biological collapse. The law assumes free will and rational actors, but as we discussed with cognitive map failure, extreme dehydration destroys a person's ability to be a rational actor.
So what does this all mean? Ultimately, they reach a negotiated plea. Kodikian pleads no contest to second-degree murder.
Yeah.
And the sentencing is where you really see Judge Forbes wrestling with this exact friction. He has to balance the strict letter of the law with these immense mitigating circumstances.
There were a lot of mitigating factors.
There was absolutely no malice. The police investigated deeply and found no hidden motives, no fights over a girl, no financial incentives, nothing. They were deeply close friends.
Yeah.
And incredibly, the Coughlin family submitted a statement to the court saying they didn't believe Kodikian acted with malicious intent. They effectively forgave him.
Which is an astonishing act of grace that profoundly influenced the judge.
Judge Forbes sentences him to 15 years, but suspends 13 of them. Kadikian ends up serving just 16 months in prison. It's like the justice system was handed a problem of human biology and had to solve it using a rigid legal code. Is there even room in the law for a desert madness exception?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the court's decision was a very delicate and necessary balancing act.
How so?
The justice system had to firmly and publicly state that mercy killings in the field are legally unacceptable. You cannot set a precedent where people can legally execute their hiking partners because they feel scared, hopelessly lost, or medically unqualified to judge their friend's condition.
Right, that would be an invitation to total chaos.
Yeah.
Can't have a desert madness loophole for murder.
Exactly. But by delivering a highly lenient sentence of just 16 months active time, the judge acknowledged the reality of the human condition. It recognized the profound, non-malicious psychological collapse of a man who was pushed far beyond the limits of human endurance, completely stripped of his rational faculties, watching his best friends suffer terribly.
It's a compromise between the rigid rules of society and the brutal, unforgiving realities of nature. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to hold on to a few key things we've uncovered today. We've explored the terrifying physiological reality of cognitive map failure.
Right.
How losing water literally shrinks your brain's logic center, forcing your mind to build invisible walls of panic that trap you in plain sight of rescue. We've seen the tragedy of cognitive misattribution.
The prickly pear.
Exactly. How misunderstanding a simple stomachache from an unripe cactus fruit can literally alter the course of history and lead to a fatal decision.
And we've seen how the legal system is forced to navigate the impossible gray area between compassion, biological breakdown, and the absolute finality of murder.
It's a stark reminder that we are biological creatures first. When the environment strips away our comfort, our water, our safety well, our own brains can very quickly become our worst enemy.
Truly.
And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over today. We know that Ranger Matson found the camp just a few hours after Coughlin died.
Right.
If he had arrived just a little bit earlier, maybe if he had decided to take his patrol route in reverse that morning, this entire ordeal would be nothing more than a scary campfire story about a narrow escape.
That's the craziest part. No murder charges, no 70-pound boulders, no prison time. Just a bad weekend in the desert.
Exactly. It leaves you wondering, in your own life, under the stress of your own daily pressures, how many of your life-altering decisions are based on completely misinterpreting the facts that are sitting right in front of you?